I'm calling the first speaker today, Mr. Ólafur Þór Gunnarsson. The floor is yours.
There we go. Svona er ekki. Skipti með þessu hér. Okay. Good afternoon. Those of you visiting from abroad, welcome to Iceland. We're here to discuss what's been talked about in media as Bill 183, which the presenters of the bill before Parliament basically view as a human rights bill, or a right of children. At the beginning of my discussion, I would like to point out to you that I have been in contact with the organizers of this conference beforehand, discussing the issue that male presenters at this conference are to say the least, very overrepresented, and this is not what my party, or which is a feminist movement in Iceland, would stand for, at least not on a regular basis. So, anyways, without further ado, this works, or doesn't it? I can hit this. That's fine. It changes here. Okay. Þetta hefur tekið að tímanum, sko. Okay, there we go. Okay, the bill in the context of Iceland's legal code. In 2005, female circumcision was banned by Icelandic law following a pretty intense debate. The same law was passed in the United Kingdom in 1995. Iceland's law and constitution requires equal protection and rights regardless of gender, religion, ethnicity, race, and so on. And several articles of the Constitution address equality and human rights. The current bill confers the same protection to boys as it does for girls. And I ask you to keep this in mind throughout my talk, because that's basically what the presenters of the bill are viewing this as. Now, Iceland has a pretty extensive record on human rights. We pride ourselves of various things or milestones as far as human rights are concerned. We legalized gay and lesbian marriage in 2010. We passed the Gender Equality Act in 1976, and this year the Equal Pay Act was put into effect for both genders. We also elected the first woman president in the world in 1980, and in 2009 our first female president was also an openly gay or lesbian woman. We were one of the first states in the world to recognize the State of Israel. We were the first country to recognize the Palestinian state, and the first country to recognize the Baltic states. So our human rights record speaks for itself. Now, the UN Convention on the Child Rights was presented for signature and ratification by the member states in 1989. The UN Convention was signed by the Icelandic government in 1990 and ratified by the Icelandic Parliament in 1992. The convention was legalized in Iceland in 2013. Now, we see this as a question of human rights. No person should be subject to unnecessary operations without their consent. As the procedure is irreversible, it takes away the child's rights to make its own decisions on issues of religion and culture or tradition. The Convention on the Child's Rights states this in various articles, that This is a basic right of every child. The Convention further states that on issues of religious and traditional practices, the child should be at the center of the decisions. Now, you will hear today, and you've probably heard throughout the debate, that there are various medical data that will be presented. Now, there are several reports that have shown that in high-risk populations, the risk of HIV infection is lessened in men who are circumcised. Now, this is in high-risk population, and these are adults. There are also some reports on the lower infection rate of human papillomavirus. And again, this is adults, not infant children. And by the way, human papillomavirus can be vaccinated against with a very effective vaccine, as you probably know. There is some reduction in the rate of urinary tract infections, with most reports stating that the number needed to treat is 80 boys circumcised to prevent one infection. The complications, first the immediate ones, which are not common. I must state that there are varying reports, but most reports will vary the incidence between 1 and 10%, depending on both who practices the circumcision, how it's done, and so on. These are, as you can see, infections, bleeding, scarring, and in very rare instances, amputation. And there, unfortunately, have been some reports of children dying as a consequence of the operation. The long-term complications, I decided basically to put down here that they're largely unknown. Many of them are anecdotal and personal, and there are accounts of psychological trauma, sexual dysfunction, and so on and so forth. But to my knowledge, there are not very many, let's say, scientifically strong research that have been done on this issue in particular. So that's basically that. Now, the indications for infant circumcision, there are currently no absolute medical indications to routine circumcision of infant boys. And this is extremely important because we, as medical professionals or as a society, we should not condone operations on anybody that aren't medically indicated. Several structural abnormalities, most of which are rare or relatively rare, require interventions, most of which do not require circumcision to alleviate. Well, that's also important because most of the problems that occur, for example, let's say balanitis, phimosis, and so on and so forth, these are not ailments that need a full circumcision to be alleviated, and therefore are extremely rare, to say the least. Now, infections such as balanitis, urethritis, and other local infections can almost always be remedied with less invasive methods than a circumcision. Now, for the medical professions in here, now, most of you have heard this old old Latin saying, so to speak, primum non nocere, or first do no harm. This is extremely important for both for me as a physician and for probably most healthcare professionals. We're trained very rigorously to adhere to this, that your first order of the day is whatever you do with your patients or for your patients, do not harm them. Now, there are cultural reasons, obviously, and traditional for circumcision. Now, the most common one that you, at least that several medical organizations, including the British, state that when asked, this is the most common reason, that the parents want their child to look like their father. There are some perceived hygienical reasons which may in some cultures adhere, but mostly, you know, routine cleaning with water and soap will do the trick. Now, concerns that the child will be singled out should obviously be a both-way argument. That is, in a society where nobody is circumcised, a child that is circumcised is under danger of being singled out and vice versa. Now, religion is a very important personal issue for most and a very private one as well. Now, history shows that religions evolve over time and adapt to the society they're a part of, and all the major religions have a history of this. Christianity, Judaism, Islam, and so on and so forth. We all have evolved with the changes in society, and I see that as a very positive thing. Iceland's constitution clearly states the freedom of religion, and the UN Convention of the Child's Rights also states that a child should not be, this right should not be taken away from a child. Now, some of the issues raised during the debate in Parliament, I know my time is short, so I'll go quickly through these. You can read these, but basically, these are all issues that both the committee, the Judicial Committee, will take into account, and also should, the comments that have been raised in the committee are also here, and these will also be taken into account by the committee. Now, in conclusion, the presenters of the bill see it as their duty to protect the rights of children. There are no absolute medical indications for routine circumcision of children. And finally, religions that continue to adapt to the societies in which they're practiced will remain strong and continue to be the driving forces of well-being of the society. Thank you.